Good morning, friends. My name is Matthew Green. I'm the very proud Labour critic for Canada's only Labour Party, the NDP, and I'm here today joined with my friends from Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, including President Lana Payne, National Secretary Treasurer Len Poirier, and Unifor Quebec Director Daniel Cloutier. Today, our friends from Unifor are here on the Hill with dozens of their members talking to MPs about the upcoming budget. And with the recession looming, I think that the priorities that you're going to hear identified today are going to be critically important for workers. They're here to address Canada's affordability crisis. They're here to deliver on a permanent EI reform and adopt strong anti-scab legislation and implement a just transition. We will now hand it over to the Secretary Treasurer, Mr. Len Poirier, to expand on the program that they have for us in Ottawa this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for the kind words welcoming us here to Ottawa this week. Hello, my name is Len Poirier, National Secretary Treasurer. I'm excited to be here with you this morning to share Unifor's vision for a more equitable and resilient economy, one that works for workers. Our union represents more than 315,000 active members plus retirees from all across Canada from all sectors of the economy. From federal labor law to public services and investments in industries, Unifor members deeply are affected by the decisions of the federal government. These decisions have intersected in workers' lives in the past few years in some big ways. Unifor members across manufacturing, hospitality, and other sectors have relied on EI in recent years more than ever. Workers face shutdowns, supply chain shortages, and rising costs, and had to rely on public programs more than ever. When these programs, like EI, fall short, Unifor members did what they do best, campaign to change the program and make things better. We are here in Ottawa this week to continue the conversations. 45 workers, mainly members of our National Executive Board, are here with us. Together, we will deliver our message to members of Parliament, ministers, and decision makers. Unifor is meeting with every single political party with a seat in the House this week. The count this morning is up to 110 meetings with MPs and ministers representing more than a third of all the members of the House of Commons. The decisions made for the 2023 federal budget will shape the next several years for workers and our families. And we have some urgent priorities, which Lana Payne, our national president, will share with you now. Sister Lana, well.
Good morning, everyone, and solidarity. It's nice to be here with all of you today. As Len just mentioned, we have a formidable team with us this week, with Unifor leadership and worker representatives from across the country. As many of you know, these are quite challenging times for working people who are dealing with economic uncertainty and the continued impact of the pandemic. An affordability crisis, broken supply chains, high inflation, rapidly rising interest rates, and public services under stress, such as healthcare, place too many workers and their families in a crisis scenario. What we need in response to this unique moment is a federal government that implements worker-centric policies and a reinvestment in strong public services and labor market supports. As you know, across the country, workers are experiencing the burden of higher prices, especially on critical goods like food, shelter, and fuel. The real problem is that as prices and inflation rise and corporate profits reach new record highs, workers' wages and incomes are just not keeping up. Shareholders and corporate executives are reaping obscene benefits in the form of higher dividends, share repurchases, and bonuses. They are not paying the price for inflation. Workers are. Rather than developing a tailored response intended to slow profits, stop profiteering, fix supply chain bottlenecks, and help workers keep up, policymakers have taken to blaming workers instead. including the Governor of the Bank of Canada, who has basically declared class war on working people in this country. Consider what he and the bank are saying at this moment. Advice to employers, keep wages low. And now, as of last week, telling Canada that we need a higher unemployment rate in order to deal with inflation. Blaming workers for having a job and actually demanding decent wages, benefits, and working conditions is simply unacceptable. We need an economy that works for everyone, not an economy that delivers only for the few. Unifor will not tolerate this false narrative of a wage price spiral to justify aggressive interest rate hikes, plunging our economy into what is likely to be an inevitable recession. Last week, as I mentioned in Toronto, the Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem doubled down. He called for a rebalancing of the labor market so that the bank can meet its arbitrary inflation target of 2%. He says the problem is too many people are working and not enough people are unemployed, if you can imagine that. And that's making it harder for his bank to do their job. This is illogical. I'll remind the governor, as I believe he's meeting with other bankers today, that workers are in fact the economy. His old school flawed tactics do not address the root cause of the problem. Skyrocketing food costs, broken supply chains, a war that has increased energy and other prices. None of these things are fixed with higher interest rates. Consider again who are being hurt the most by the bank's actions. The people who wake up every day to provide the things all of us need to live, grow, and thrive. Everyone deserves a good job, and working people deserve economic policies that meet their needs. If there is to be a recession on the horizon, then government needs to act fast to protect workers and their families. To start, our antiquated employment insurance system doesn't meet workers' needs. Permanent reform is required now. The pandemic exposed the deep flaws with the employment insurance system. The federal government has actually committed to do this work, but so far, little has been done to show for it. A new, modern program must expand eligibility criteria, improve benefits, and explore new funding streams. We need solutions to stop greedflation, and that includes everything from expanding the excess profits tax beyond banks and financial institutions to considering caps on profits wherever profiteering is occurring. It's quite simple, really. Fewer profits flowing to executives and shareholders at the top, and more help to families by delivering on promises made around prescription drug coverage, dental care, and affordable housing. With respect to the climate crisis, we recognize the positive steps taken so far, including announcements in the most recent fall economic update. Unifor is recommending, though, that the federal government think even bigger, implementing a just transition fund to support workers in all facets of transition today. Later today, we're expecting the Ontario government to table its repeal of Bill 28, the law that united Ontario's workers in unprecedented solidarity and action, the law that showed just how far Unifor and the labor movement were and are willing to go to defend fundamental union rights and collective bargaining rights in this country. Workers' rights, collective bargaining rights, and the right to strike will be strengthened with federal anti-scab legislation. Replacement workers prolong labor disputes and undermine the rights of Canadians. Anti-scab legislation is needed now. Unifor is bringing a bold message this week to MPs and to ministers. Act now to make investments and implement policies that will bolster and support workers and their families through any coming economic storm and beyond. I'm going to now turn things over to our Quebec Director, Daniel Cloutier.
Merci, Lana. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis très heureux d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. La situation n'est pas facile pour les travailleuses et travailleurs en ce moment. Elle ne fera qu'empirer à moins que le gouvernement fédéral n'agisse pour intégrer la résilience et l'équité dans les politiques fédérales. Partout au pays, les travailleuses et les travailleurs ressentent le fardeau de la hausse des prix, surtout sur les biens essentiels comme la nourriture, le logement et les services. Ce n'est pas le salaire qui pousse les prix à la hausse, mais bien les profits éhontés des entreprises. Les profits des entreprises atteignent des nouveaux sommets. Et malheureusement, contrairement à ce que certains peuvent véhiculer, les salaires et les revenus des travailleurs ne suivent pas la courbe. Plutôt que d'élaborer une réponse adaptée pour ralentir les profits et mettre au terme aux bénéfices excessifs, corriger les goulots d'étranglement de la chaîne d'approvisionnement et aider les travailleuses et travailleurs à suivre le rythme, nos politiciens et politiciennes ont plutôt choisi de rejeter la faute sur les travailleuses et les travailleurs. Ils utilisent l'argumentaire trompeur d'une spirale des prix et des salaires pour justifier des hausses considérables des taux d'intérêt et plonger notre économie dans une récession qui autrement serait évitable. C'est illogique, totalement inacceptable. La semaine dernière, à Toronto, le gouverneur de la Banque du Canada est encore allé plus loin, en appelant à un rééquilibrage du marché du travail. Essentiellement, il dit que le problème est qu'il y a trop de gens qui travaillent, pas assez de gens sans emploi. Vous voyez le piège? Et cela rend de plus en plus difficile le travail de la banque pour s'attaquer à l'inflation et la ramener dans les taux qu'eux ont décidé de façon arbitraire. Je rappelle au gouvernement que l'économie, c'est les travailleuses et les travailleurs qui la font. Les gens qui se lèvent à chaque jour pour fournir des choses que nous avons toutes et tous besoin pour vivre, grandir et prospérer. Tout le monde mérite un bon emploi. Si une récession se profile à l'horizon pour le gouvernement doit agir rapidement pour protéger les travailleuses et les travailleurs, pas réduire leur salaire ni les mettre au chômage. Voilà pourquoi on a défendu, ou on vient ici cette semaine pour défendre 4 priorités. La première, il faut un système d'assurance-emploi qui a de l'allure. Le régime actuel est obsolète. Il ne répond pas aux besoins des travailleuses et des travailleurs et il doit être réformé. Le gouvernement fédéral s'est déjà engagé à faire ce travail, mais jusqu'à présent, il y a très peu de résultats. Un nouveau programme moderne doit élargir les critères d'admissibilité, améliorer les prestations et explorer de nouvelles sources de financement, y compris le rétablissement des contributions fédérales, pour corriger ce programme essentiel une fois pour toutes. Deuxièmement, nous avons besoin de solutions pour mettre fin à l'inflation et à la cupidité. Et cela inclut tout, de l'élargissement de l'impôt sur les bénéfices excessifs à l'examen de plafonds de profit lorsque le gonflement des prix est trop évident. Troisièmement, la question de la transition juste. Cette semaine, les dirigeants mondiaux et quelques représentants et représentantes d'Unifor sont à la conférence sur le climat COP27 en Égypte. Ici, chez nous, les travaux pour mener à bien la grande tâche d'une transition juste et durable pour les travailleuses et les travailleurs ont déjà commencé. Nous reconnaissons les mesures positives jusqu'à présent, y compris les annonces faites dans le plus récent énoncé économique de l'automne. Unifor recommande au gouvernement fédéral de voir encore plus grand, en mettant en place un fonds de transition juste pour soutenir les travailleuses et les travailleurs dans toutes les facettes de la transition actuelle. Nous voulons des garanties sur le fait que ce sont les travailleuses et les travailleurs qui guideront ce travail, qui dirigeront ces tables de négociation et qui éclaireront cette stratégie. Pour faire face au changement climatique et au changement économique, nous devons tous ramer ensemble. Finalement, alors que nous préparons ces ajustements à long terme, les travailleuses et travailleurs ont besoin de meilleurs outils pour se protéger les uns les autres et pour protéger les bons emplois. Ce qui nous amène au 4e point, une loi anti-SCAB, anti-briseur de grève. Nous nous attendons à ce que le gouvernement de l'Ontario dépose une abrogation du projet de loi 28 cette semaine. La loi qui a uni les travailleuses et travailleurs de l'Ontario dans une solidarité et une action sans précédent. La loi qui a montré jusqu'où nous étions prêts à aller pour défendre les droits fondamentaux et la négociation collective. parce que des membres d'Unifor de toutes les provinces, y compris du Québec, seraient venus porter main forte au travers de l'Ontario. Ça aurait été une attaque sans précédent d'utiliser cette clause de nonobstant-là. Voilà pourquoi les droits des travailleuses et des travailleurs, nos droits de négociation collective et nos droits de grève doivent être renforcés par une loi fédérale anti-briseur de grève. Unifor en a fait sa mission. Les travailleuses et travailleurs de remplacement prolongent les conflits de travail et minent le droit à la négociation collective. Merci de votre écoute. C'était donc les 4 priorités qu'on se fixe cette semaine. On va parcourir l'ensemble de la colline parlementaire, rencontrer les différents ministres, députés de tous les partis qui veulent nous voir et c'est sur ces sujets-là qu'on va les entretenir. Merci à toutes.
Hello. Hold on. I'll just, we'll start with 2 questions in the room. And reporter online, if you have any question, please raise your hand with the raise hand function to notify us of the question. Go ahead.
You won't be surprised to hear that I have more than 2 questions. So I will ask 2 now, and then we'll go to the call, and then you'll get more time with me. Puis en plus, je suis bilingue. Je travaille pour CBC. Mon nom est Catherine Cullen. Alors, in English first, mais je vais peut-être vous demander de répéter certaines choses en français aussi, si ça vous dérange pas. I want to start, Ms. Payne, with class warfare and Tiff Macklem. If I had a lot, well, I'm going to just go for it. I want you to just expand on that because it is a pretty dramatic allegation at a time when there are concerns about politicizing what ought to be an independent institution.
Yes, well, he's politicizing it with every single statement that he makes publicly, and not to expect unions in this country to respond to things like keep wages low and we need higher unemployment is to be kind of naive. So I think actually he needs to think about his own public statements. Yes, politicizing the Bank of Canada. I think it's important in a democracy like Canada that we actually do question monetary policy. It's healthy for debate. It's healthy for economic debate in Canada for us to do so. And we'll make sure that we continue to be part of that discussion. We're not going to go away. I think right now, when you consider that the medicine that the bank has with respect to inflation is causing a lot of pain out there.
That is my second question. Puis peut-être après, je vais juste vous demander de répéter ça en français. Maybe we'll just do all the English first and all the French, if that's okay with everybody. It's just to understand that, like, I take your point about the economic pain that people are feeling, but as you well know, the idea of raising interest rates is to blunt inflation, which Governor Macklem has said clearly hits low-income workers the worst. So if you don't want, if you are, as I understand it, agreeing with the NDP's critique of rising interest rates, I wonder.
But there are all kinds of things that we can do to support low-income families in Canada. Those are things that government policy can address very quickly. The worst thing you want is for low-income people not to actually have a job that pays them a decent wage. So he's creating a circular argument here, and I think it's acceptable that we're challenging him on such statements.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to understand whether you are saying that the Bank of Canada should not be raising the interest rate.
The fact of the matter is that the Bank of Canada has raised interest rates more rapidly than many other countries in the world. So obviously that's something that we should be talking about. And also we should ask ourselves, is it actually doing what he says it needs to do? So inflation has dropped from somewhere around 8.1% to like 7% right now. And yet we've had these rapidly rising interest rates. So is it doing what he wants it to do? And secondly, we all know, even our own finance minister in Canada has admitted and explained that there are many things contributing to inflation, a lot of them outside of our control. So this seems like a lot of needless pain on working people right now in Canada. And what we're asking is, let's have a debate about this. Let's talk about it in our country and really, focus in on who's getting hurt by this. So the flip side is we've had record profits. Corporations in the second quarter of 2022 had a full 25% share of our GDP going to corporate profits, the highest ever in our history. The 5 years prior to the pandemic, it was a 15% average of our GDP.
But I haven't.
But he never talks about this, does he? The last report that they gave, he blamed workers basically 9 times when interest rates were discussed. Not once were corporate profits raised as part of this discussion. So if we're going to put it all out there in terms of what is contributing to this, then we ask the Bank of Canada to talk about this problem over here too, which is massive corporate profits.
I just want to be sure I understand your position on the interest rate. You're
Yes.
saying talk about it, but you're not saying don't raise it, or you are? Where do you
Yes,
stand?
they're up high enough now. We need to slow this down.
Juste répéter, en particulier, j'étais très intéressée dans cette question d'un class warfare, une guerre des classes. Vous voulez dire quoi par ça?
Bien, c'est sûr qu'à partir du moment où, si je prends la situation au Québec, là, où est-ce qu'on est en pénurie de main-d'œuvre, il y a une crise du logement qui pousse les prix du logement à la hausse. On a vu l'inflation incroyable au niveau de la nourriture. Et là, on a la Banque du Canada qui vient nous dire il faut réduire les salaires ou réduire à tout le moins les augmentations et réduire les emplois. Pour nous, ça ne fait pas de sens. Et là, c'est une attaque à la classe des travailleurs et des travailleuses. Ils peinent avec difficulté pour réussir à joindre les deux bouts. C'est pas des chèques de 600 $ qui vont leur permettre de payer le loyer. Et donc, dans ce sens-là, c'est véritablement une attaque à la classe ouvrière que de cibler ces commentaires-là. Maintenant, est-ce que la hausse des taux d'intérêt qui a eu lieu peut avoir un impact sur le contrôle de l'inflation? Bien, probablement que oui. Toutefois, il y a plusieurs autres facteurs à cette inflation-là et on n'entend absolument personne discuter de ces autres facteurs-là. Je reviens à l'alimentation. Au Québec, notamment, on a vu que l'augmentation des profits éhontés des grands distributeurs de nourriture justifie en grande partie la hausse des coûts. Mais la hausse des taux d'intérêt ne règle absolument pas cette situation-là. Quand on a de la difficulté d'avoir des chaînes d'approvisionnement qui fonctionnent, qu'on se retrouve avec des manques sur les tablettes, c'est tout de même pas les taux d'intérêt qui provoquent ça. Fait qu'à un moment donné, si on veut regarder la situation de façon globale, il faut aussi adresser des solutions pour les autres enjeux. Et moi, je partage l'opinion de ma consoeur Lana. On a eu beaucoup d'augmentation du taux d'intérêt cette année. Ça a été très rapide. C'est peut-être le temps de mettre le pied sur le break puis se concentrer sur les autres facteurs.
If the reporters online have any questions, please use the raise hand function. Si vous avez une question et que vous êtes en ligne, utilisez la fonction lever la main. Back to the room.
Guess what? I've got more questions.
Okay.
I won't keep you here all day, I promise. But I think you're covering a lot of really interesting topics, and my friends in the press gallery will have access to this tape. I'm sure they'd like to hear. I can't not ask you about the notwithstanding clause, obviously, a hot topic. I guess I wonder, first and foremost, particularly since I'm on Parliament Hill, the Conservatives, as you well know, have tried to make efforts, inroads with workers, labor perhaps, but certainly with, anyway. With workers.
Which Conservatives?
Well, I want to ask more broadly, what do you think the impact of this most recent kerfuffle doesn't seem like quite the right word, but incident with Mr. Ford is going to be on the ability of Conservatives, both provincially and federally, to make inroads with workers?
Well, they always have a challenge making inroads with workers, particularly when, they adopt policies that are anti-worker. So, this is the big challenge that we have. I think the Ontario example is interesting from the perspective that we have a Conservative premier who has been investing in the economy. He has made good moves around investing, for example, in the auto sector, in the other in the remaining manufacturing sector. He said that he wants to do good work there. The other challenge is, of course, what's happening with public sector workers in healthcare and education. So you don't get to, split the labor movement this way. And I think what we showed last week is that when we have an attack on our fundamental trade union freedoms, workers will come together to push back very hard against that. And that's exactly what was going to happen. In fact, today, potentially, we would have been on a general strike in Ontario instead of being here with you had this bill not been repealed.
Mr. Poilievre has also been making, he's been reaching out to workers in Canada. The only comments I have heard from him on this particular issue was one interview where he said basically he hopes it's tough on both sides. He hopes folks can work it out. I can see Matthew Green shaking his head behind
I hope he has a better answer than that going forward, because that's the reality is that he, as a leader of the opposition, actually needs to provide solutions when we get into these kerfuffles, as you pointed out. To say, I hope they work it out, is not exactly strong leadership, I wouldn't suggest.
I feel like it is the natural response if I were to ask you, does this take the notwithstanding clause off the table? That there would be an urge to say, well, yes, of course. But if we sort of take a step back and ask ourselves this as a political tool, do you think that it's still something we're going to see waved around in Canada in the next few years?
I think what occurred in the last couple of weeks in Ontario would give pause to other premiers to use the notwithstanding clause in this way. In other words, to override fundamental trade union freedoms. You can be guaranteed that other premiers were watching very closely to see what would happen here. And I think the labor movement sent a message to all of them that this is just not on.
Not least, if that's okay.
Yep.
So I've asked you about the Conservatives. I'm going to ask you about the NDP now. The perennial question that the folks at the NDP, I think, have to deal with at this point when the government does something that does not go far enough for the NDP is always, well, shouldn't that have been part of your deal? And I wonder what you say to the NDP. You've got a laundry list here of things that you'd like to see the government doing. Do you wish that the NDP had asked for one or all of these things when it made its agreement with the Liberals?
Well, I am the president of a trade union, and we bargain every single day of the week. So we understand when parties get into this situation that you have to work out a deal. And they worked out a deal, which was not bad. And of course, we're going to put pressure on both parties to make sure that they do more things for working people in the country. That's our job.
This concludes the press conference. Ici Mireille, la conférence de presse. Merci.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Outstanding.